Welcome to First Reading, the Old Testament lectionary podcast for all of God's creatures, including perhaps pets who may or may not be on the floor right here. I'm Tim McNinch, and I teach Hebrew Bible at Christian Theological Seminary.
And I'm Paul Essa. I am a PhD student in Hebrew Bible Old Testament at Yale University.
I am Rosie Candlepool. I'm an assistant professor of religion at Wake Forest University.
And I'm Rachel Wren, interim dean of Trinity Lutheran Seminary, but still doing a little Bible stuff. So, well, there. We are the First Reading Podcast, and we are bringing you preaching tips and tricks for the lectionary text for Sunday, September 28th. We are rocking an exceptionally cheerful excerpt from Amos, chapter 6, 1a, 4 to 7. Then we actually do have a very cheerful psalm, Psalm 146. We've got a little bit from 1 Timothy 6, and then our gospel for the day is Luke 16, 19 to 31. I think for the most part, though, we all settled on Amos 6, right?
I mean, I glanced at the others, and the gospel reading is the parable or story or whatever that Jesus tells about the rich guy and Lazarus.
Yeah,
right?
that's it.
Rich guy. Yeah. Yeah, with a little feature from Father Abraham.
Yeah, Abraham's bosom.
That's the one. All right, well, let's get this party started, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I'll throw just one thing out there that I got to give it to for all that we have critiqued the creators of the Revised Common Lectionary for like shying away from things. They did not shy away from this text. They did do some excerpting, so maybe they did shy away, but like they picked a text which is not easy, I think, especially for those of us who were born and raised here in the United States. So, shout out to their courage on this one.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem isolated. Like when we're looking at year C in the readings, like Paul and I just did a batch, and this idea of woe to those who are at ease and those who have luxuries, those who have money. We've been seeing an economic theme in the readings for the last month, right? And more. So it feels as though, this particular reading, it's hard to avoid the woe to you. Right? Yeah, you can hear it, but the themes have been there, and so it does feel like for preachers, you've been building maybe to a moment here that Amos really kind of capitalizes. Yeah.
And there's been a lot of Amos, I think, if I remember right. It's popped up several times in the lectionary recently, so hey, maybe if you've been taking our advice and preaching from the Old Testament, your congregation might already have a little bit of Amos on the brain and be able to track along with where you're at here.
That.
For those that haven't been tracking along with Amos, can we give the elevator speech for who's Amos and where does this book sit?
I mean, I think we're in the 8th century, right? And this is not a professional prophet. Who is called to the service of a prophet, and he's saying really wild things. And for the most part, the people that he's speaking to seems to be the northern part of Israel. There's a repetition of Samaria and the house of Joseph. A little bit of that is towards the south, but for the most part, the reference and I think the people that he's addressing are the north. We talked about economic themes. I think one of the major things that Amos seems to be concerned about is justice, but mostly justice as is related to the use of wealth. And in this case, it's like communal, treasury is what he's concerned about. Like what we own as a people and how the people at the top in charge of what the rest of us own are using it, and I think that's the concern here. And he seems to be, interested in this concept of judgment. And here, I think for him, judgment here seems to be like what God is going to do in reply to this mismanagement of public funds or mismanagement of public authority and public privilege. So that's what I can say about Amos in the context in which we are.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's a little bit different in that way from some of the other biblical prophets who, one of the strongest themes in the prophets is sort of a condemnation of the people's not adhering to the religious or worship regulations that God has for Israel and for Judah. And while that theme is there in Amos, what really rises to the surface is this whole theme of social justice, you might say, and the ways that those with power and wealth and privilege are taking advantage of those who don't have those things. That seems to be the real thing that irks God and is voiced by Amos.
I think that's all true. And I think one more sort of nuance to throw in there about this is that if we look back at, first of all, what you said, Paul, about how this guy wasn't raised to be a prophet. Like we have, sometimes I think we think of prophets so much as like John the Baptist or Elijah, who are these weird, people out in the field who were isolated from society. And there were prophets like that, but there were also a guild of prophets who had a career. And I just love this line in Amos chapter 7, verse 14, when somebody's complaining about Amos to the king. And Amos said, "I'm no prophet nor a prophet's son. I'm a herdsman, a dresser of sycamore trees." Like, it's just this great, like, I'm not even doing the thing. I'm not a professional in it, and I'm doing it better than you. Like, you see. But I think one of the things that he picks up on as well is that it's sort of the economic abuses also that are happening within the context of worship. So if you back up a little bit to Amos 5, verse 21, there's the famous, I despise your festivals. I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me your burnt offerings and your grain offerings, I will not accept them. Take away from me the noise of your songs, but let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an everlasting stream. There's this sense that people are not only perpetuating abuses, but they're doing it within the context of a supposed righteousness or a pretend worship of God. And God is basically saying, like, the blood on your hands has tainted what you're doing, not just because it's a bad thing to do, but because you're trying to use religion and worship of me to cover it up or to kind of excuse it. So there's that religious context here as well.
That's right.
And you quoted that really sort of famous text from Amos, probably the most famous lines from Amos. And our text this week follows right after that.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of and furthermore.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think I don't want to get too deep into the Hebrew, but I will just say that the Hebrew here is tough, right? Like, this is an 8th century prophet. Because of that, like, it can be kind of archaic. I went down to a rabbit hole on the notables word, nukuve, and that's a really interesting word. I won't necessarily throw anything out there because I didn't find any preaching point on it, but I'll just say that the Hebrew here is really, it's wild.
Especially the vocabulary.
Yeah, exactly. Text critical marks just all over it.
Yeah, so we've hinted at that this is a kind of challenging text, and that it speaks pretty directly to some economic abuses. What is the heat that this text brings?
Could I say too that maybe as part of answering your questions, but also trying to dodge your question a little bit. It seems to me as though, like, consistently Amos has been getting at, like, this idea of exploitation and dishonesty in the use of public funds. But over here, the tone is a little different. I think what the people are being accused of is not necessarily exploitation. I think there's definitely that in the subtext, but I think what they're being accused of here is, like, some kind of a detachment from society and maybe a little bit of numbness and lack of solidarity, which is different from, it's a different kind of an economic dishonesty, but it's not one that is active. Is like, it's passive. I have my wealth. I sleep on beds that are made from ivory, so I don't care about your poverty, And I think that's what they're being accused of. And comparing that to Amos 8, which we just did last week, it's, maybe both of them speak to this whole grand idea of how wealth is being used and how people participate in society economically. But more so, it's like it's dealing with two sides of the same coin. There's the exploitation that happens a lot more actively. And there's this, like, I don't care. I don't want to participate. I'm fine. You guys go deal with your thing. And I think Amos is calling both as sinful, and that God's judgment is coming on both. And that's the interesting pairing here.
Ouch.
Yeah, are you dotting this? Well, the nugget fin. I mean, what you're pointing to is just it's basically like what we were talking about. Like it's the like kind of first world problems, right? I mean, and for preachers that are kind of locked into the gospel, which is something a lot of you are. This is in lockstep with the rich man and Lazarus, right? The example there is a rich man who has all those riches, who's sleeping on his lovely bed. And day after day, the same person is on his stoop, basically. And he's able to ignore that person over and over again until death comes for him, right? And then a moment of reckoning happens. Similar to what Amos is doing, this is a moment of reckoning. But the way that we use riches, I mean, I hear it. It's really discomforting to hear the way that we can use our wealth to protect ourselves, wall ourselves off from the grief that Amos is saying. You're not grieved over the ruin of Joseph, right? You're instead celebrating your wealth, your tax breaks. You're celebrating that, and you're not feeling pain. And that's where the problem is. You've used that to wall yourself off. So for folks that are looking for a connection to the gospel, Amos and Jesus in Luke are in lockstep.
Can we just say that this is another thing that Revised Common Lectionary did really, really well this time around? Like, we don't have an example here of an angry God of the Old Testament and a happy, peaceful Jesus. Like, Jesus is saying hard things here. Like, God gets angry both in the Old Testament and the New Testament. So, like, let's just celebrate that that's okay. That's a good, it's good that God gets angry when injustices happen, because there's another part in Amos, I can't remember the verse right now. So Amos 5:14, again, backing up a little bit, Amos is again talking to the people and saying, seek good and not evil, that you may live. I mean, there's this sense that the type of life you're living right now, which is so abundant in prosperity and luxury, is a living death. It's not actually a life. It's eating away at you. It's eating away at your community. Seek good so that you can actually experience life. I think that, there's a desire here for the people who are perpetrating the ills to be saved, quote unquote, as much as the people who are being oppressed. And, it's easy to give money. It's not so easy to admit that the kind of lifestyle I'm leading is actively contributing to my own kind of demise and purposelessness and isolation as well.
Yeah, so this text is one that really doesn't leave you an excuse. So for the people speaking to myself here who might say, "Well, I'm not oppressing anyone. I'm not, defrauding people or selling them for a pair of slippers or whatever it is that Amos says earlier in the book." There's a sense here, which Paul was really hitting on, this way that your detachment from the suffering is also culpable, right? And I'm really drawn there to verse 6. Goes through this litany of woes to all of this luxurious living. And in verse 6 picks up those of you who are drinking wine from like
big bowls,
giant bowls, and anointing yourself with the finest oils, but are not grieved over the ruin of Joseph. And a little Hebrew nugget there would be that word grieved is from the root chala, which is about sickness. So you're not
sickened,
sick to your stomach over the ruin, the suffering of the people of Israel, the ruin of Joseph. So there's a real like bodily, tangible sort of sense that's in the prophetic poetry here of you're living, you're feasting, you're gorging yourself, but you're not sick to your stomach over the ruin of Joseph.
That's a really good play. Yeah.
And while I'm on Hebrew, there is one other Hebrew thing that I thought was kind of interesting here. There's a bit of a inclusio here. So it begins by issuing woe to those at the end of verse 1, those notables. What was that? Nekuve, of the first of the nations, which is kind of a weird term, first of the nations, but that's just a pretty rigid translation of Reshit HaGoyim. So top, the cream of the crop, the top of the people, Reshit HaGoyim. And then down in verse 7, the back end of this inclusio says, therefore these cream of the crop, the ones who have been luxuriating themselves, they shall be the first to go into exile. Rosh Olim. We have Reshit HaGoyim and Rosh Golim. So there's a kind of like wordplay there. You think you're there at the top, but you're going to be the first ones to experience the hammer of justice when it comes around. I was trying to think like how you could translate that wordplay. The creme de la creme will get creamed.
Yeah.
Creme de la creme.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The elite will get lit up.
Yep.
That is so, when we talk about prophetic, to have written this in the 8th century, it would send shivers down your spine.
It will.
It will. Well, who went into exile first, right? It was.
Yeah. It was the elite.
It always is. In an effective exile, it always is the elite.
Yeah. There may be some hyperbole here in the way that, that this ripples out into human experience more widely. I think when calamities come, really it is the poor and marginalized who feel it first and most profoundly. That seems to be more the case. But I think maybe what Amos is getting at, which may extend out beyond his own situation, is that the powerful and privileged are not immune to the calamities that come. And if you think you're going to escape because you've got lots of resources, the prophet says you've got another thing coming. And so you can't rest on that. You should use your privilege, spend your privilege on seeking justice for everyone. Otherwise, the calamity is going to get you just as much as anyone else.
Might be if we, so happy, right? And sermons don't have to be happy. But when we think about preaching this in a way that people in this country might be able to hear, what might be ways that you could see preaching this text?
One thing that I thought about a lot, both from last week when I did Amos 8 and then, trying to think through this text this afternoon, is what exactly wealth is. Sometimes it feels as though the Bible bashes the wealthy and the Bible doesn't like millionaires and billionaires. And that certainly is true for several reasons. But also I think it calls for the question of what exactly wealth is and why is it so common for prophetic literature to be really harsh on wealth and how it's used. And I kept thinking about this, and one thing that came to me as it's really important to, maybe preachers consider making space to define what wealth is, especially the way I see Amos thinking about it, in that Amos, I think, is pushing back on, this whole idea that wealth is what you can amass and what you have and the things that you can actually hold in your hands and say, oh yeah, I sleep on these nice couches and I drink this, fancy drink and I anoint myself with this beautiful oil. But it's mostly how you got it, especially from 8, through this honest means. And then also now how you use it, how you participate in society because of it. And so thinking about what people have and what they don't have, as both elements that would feature in the definition of wealth that Amos is constructing here. Because it's very easy for people to eliminate themselves and say, I don't sleep in fancy couches. I'm not the one that is being spoken of. But your participation in society is also, a contribution of your wealth to the overall building of society. And I think Amos is getting at both. And that's really genuinely very interesting to me. And so if I were preaching this is one thing that I feel like I'll take time to think more about and develop more and make it probably center or one of the major things to talk about here.
That's a great idea.
Isn't it stewardship season?
Well,
are we?
Not quite, but
it's always stewardship season. Says Dean Wren.
Right. That's right.
Yeah, I guess my preaching pitfall here would be not to preach condemnation of wealth as a stewardship message, because giving in your faith communities, in your churches, should be motivated by shared vision and participation in ministry, not a condemnation of the having of wealth. But I think there is an invitation here to be intentional about recognizing and stepping into a kind of shared experience, shared humanity with people from all sorts of different economic situations and social classes and all of that, to see that calamities reach us all. And so we have an opportunity, those of us who have been given privilege, to use that for the benefit of all, and that could be an actual invitation here, and not a lambasting of those with thick pocketbooks.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think Paul and I, in our last conversation too, we were talking about how Luke puts this emphasis on repentance, right? Right before these passages comes this trilogy of stories that ends with the prodigal son. And this idea that there's a party at the end of each of these stories, because each of them have found something that they've lost. They've restored an integrity to the woman that's lost her 10 coins. She's now restored that one that she lost, and all 10 are now. To the father that lost one of his sons, the son that's returned has now restored a kind of integrity, right? That in some way, that as preachers are maybe even talking about wealth, the idea is that we celebrate any kind of, restoration to an integrity, the way that we want to live, right? That we together as a community, the goal is not to lambaste one another, but to celebrate together in our constant turning together toward greater integrity and wholeness, right? And so that's really, I think, the invitation that we could hold with the Gospel of Luke through year C, as we're kind of looking at this, is we often find that just yelling or, just sort of saying the thing is not going to be the most effective way to change, but it's that invitation of love, that invitation to wholeness that might call folks to say, I want to do better with the way that I spend my money. I want to do better with the amount of power and wealth that I've been given. And I think as Americans, we can acknowledge that in terms of kind of just fortune of being born, we're born into, security. Like we have physical peace around us. And that is such a gift to not ignore the fact that we were born into a place where we could walk out into the street and not fear immediate violence, right? So, those are things that we take for granted. But these are the things that maybe, Amos and others would be pointing out the rest of the world does not have.
That's right.
Yeah, I picked up on a similar thread that you picked up on, Rosie, but you presented it in a way better way. The way I came at this was another verse in Amos, which is, I'm really sitting in chapter 5. I know we're not actually in chapter 5, but I feel like the context of chapter 5 shapes what we're doing in chapter 6. So chapter 5, verse 18 is, "Alas for you who desire the day of the Lord."
Yeah.
Do y'all know the hymn, "The Canticle of the Turning"?
Yeah,
I have deep discomfort every time we sing that song. It's the verses, "My heart will sing of the day
you
let the
bring
fires
with the fire of your justice burn."
And every time we sing that, I'm like, y'all, we would be burning with it. I mean,
Literally, we will.
I really don't want the fires of God's justice to burn. I mean, that's what, why do you want the day of the Lord in Amos 5, verse 18? It is darkness, not light. So in my mind, I'm thinking about churches that I've been a part of who preach a lot about the social injustice of others, which is a really important point. It's really important to advocate for others. At the same time, kind of like you were saying, Rosie, simply by virtue of us being a part of the system and society and culture of the United States, we participate in the oppression of people outside our country. This is really, really important for us to approach with humility. Otherwise, it makes me think of the Pharisee and the tax collector. "Oh, Lord, I thank you that I am not like this tax collector." You know what I mean?
our struggles are real. I do not say that to undermine the struggles of especially marginalized folks, Native folks, people of color, queer folks. Like, the struggles are real. At the same time, they're very, very different from what other folks are struggling with in many, many, many countries around the world. And so, I mean, I can't help it. I'm Lutheran. Like, I come at this text and I say, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and it is only by the grace of God that we are even allowed to try to work for justice. So that's maybe a little bit more of a harsh point, but I think that post-colonial theology is a really important conversation partner in this text.
Yeah, and if you're looking to set some fires, I mean, it's there.
Right there.
That's where Jesus is from when you're pointing to Jesus in this message, right? I mean, that rich man is and so I don't even know how to talk.
Yeah.
It's a very disturbing image, right?
One more pleasant note from me would just be that when I think about the things that are happening in our world right now, I think a lot about Gaza and about the experiences of immigrants and refugees in our own country, things happening with the climate and climate disaster, all sorts of things. My queer friends and the struggle that they're facing with the political situation right now. And when I let myself think about those things, I do feel a little sick to my stomach. And I think that one of the encouragements from this Amos text is that sense of unrest, that things are not right, is not necessarily a bad thing to feel that. Like, to experience that, you shouldn't avoid the feeling of that by shutting yourself off from these things and from the people who are experiencing these things, but rather let that feeling, that sickness in your stomach, motivate your action. And I think there's probably the seed of some sort of sermon in that as well, of kind of embracing the pit of the stomach feeling rather than putting our energy into avoiding it by surrounding ourselves with the luxuries that we have.
And if you want to go, take that even maybe one step extended, is that by embracing that pit in your stomach, you are embracing a divine experience here, because God's own body is experiencing that here in Amos. It feels like that's a really poignant, good place to stop for this week. And preachers, just know that, we pray for you as you go into these texts and these weeks, and maybe saying things that are difficult for some folks in your congregation to hear. So thank you for doing the really hard work that the texts call you to do this week. Folks, we've got a website, firstreadingpodcast.com, and you can go there and you can find t-shirts, you can find past episodes, you can find places to give. You can find us on the YouTube or on the Book of Faces as well. Send us a message, firstreadingpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you and to connect more in any of those spaces. Until next time, I'm Rachel Wren.
I'm Paul Essan.
Rosie Candathal.
I'm Tim McNinch. Happy preaching?
That's up.